What it do, what it does. BW just gave you music from a Bouncy coming through with Seropi, bringing us to 7:38. If you just tuned in, good evening to you and yours. This is No Cap, but the only cap you should be addicted to. But tonight I have somebody special, somebody intelligent, and somebody that I cannot wait to learn from. Her name is Julie Hall, and she's penned power. She's mentored magic, and tonight she's in our area.
Hello, welcome.
From Netflix global hits like Kings of Joburg season 3 to putting Southern Africa on the map, she's such a script whisperer, right? She is such a culture keeper, and it's amazing to have you in studio. Good evening, Julie. How are you?
Good evening, Kat. I'm very, very well, and thank you so much for inviting me to the studio. I'm really excited to be here. And just to experience a little bit more of what goes on in Botswana.
Oh, that's amazing. And I mean, you're no stranger to the studio. You were at 5FM for a couple of years. How was that?
I was. It was actually fantastic. I was there. I was in my very early 20s, so I was very young. Mm-hmm. And it was actually the kind of golden age of that particular radio station. It's still going strong. But in those days, it was really, was probably like one of the premier stations in the country. And we had a lot of fun. There was always mischief going on in the studios. And, I was quite young, and they used to play tricks on the newsreaders. They used to try and make us laugh on air. So there you are trying to read your bulletin, and which they've just handed you, and you've never seen it before.
Oh, no.
And suddenly they start lighting it on fire and things like that. So, before I joined the station, I used to hear these things on the radio and think, nah, they're not really doing it. It's just theatre of the mind, right? So no one can see what they're doing. And then I got there, and the one thing that when people visited the station, they used to cut their ties. And I was like, no, I'm sure they don't do that. Just because the businessmen would come in for an interview.
Okay.
And they I don't know, to freak them out. I don't know why they did
Interesting.
it. And I thought, no, surely they don't really cut their expensive ties. And then I opened a trunk, and there it was, full of ties, half ties that they had caught. So I was there for a few years. I did co-host a show in the end for about a year, and it was a lot of fun. I've got lots of stories. I got lots of stories.
Hence why you're a storyteller. But for the interest of somebody that does not know you, who is Julie Hall, and what are some of the top productions you've worked on?
So essentially at heart, I think I'm a writer. I come from a theatrical family. So my parents were both in broadcasting and radio, broadcasting and theatre. And so I kind of grew up surrounded by creative people. But I always loved writing, and I tried to break into the industry, and I ended up going into copywriting. So I started with an advertising background first, which I actually think is a really good discipline. And I think one thing for all, anybody who aspires to be a writer, if you want to be a writer, you must write. So it doesn't matter what you write, it's kind of a muscle that you have to exercise and write. So I think advertising was actually a very good training for me because, you're writing every day, but you also have to be strategic about your writing. You can't just write whatever you feel like because there's a specific purpose.
True.
And what you realize when you get into screenwriting for fiction, which is what I do, that it is always a mixture of creativity and strategy. So you have to use both of those brains. But it was a long journey. And finally, the first show I got to work on as a fiction writer, as a script writer, was The Early Generations in South Africa, which was a huge privilege to be part of that show because it was quite groundbreaking at the time in many ways, just in terms of, politics and aspirational and showing, a black family that was successful and doing well and all those kind of things, which then was fairly new. And it was a great show. I mean, it's kind of still going, and so that shows the legs that it had. And something really exciting about that was I met Connie Ferguson back in those days, and then got to work with her recently on Kings of Joburg, where she not only stars, but she's also the executive producer.
Well,
so she's a power lady.
She really is. We'll get into Kings of Joburg in just a little bit. Julie, what do you think makes a story truly unforgettable, both in Botswana and South Africa's context?
So I think anywhere in the world, the reason why people remember stories is the way they make them feel, especially if we're talking about screenwriting, but any story. You mainly remember it. Sometimes there's a really clever twist and you remember that, but usually it's the way it made you feel. And I think screenwriting is always, or making movies, television, it's always about story and character, but also about execution. And I think one of the areas where, we've been building our industry for the last sort of 20, 30 years in South Africa, we've been lucky enough to have been building it. And I think that we struggled with quality, and a lot of that was because of not having enough time and not having enough money. So sometimes people think, oh, you're creative, the stories just spring out and come out of your head, go onto the screen, and there they are. But actually, you need to put a lot into developing them and fine-honing them and tuning them. But it's always character, really, that gets the people. Characters at the heart of everything.
So how do you stay true to cultural authenticity while also still appealing to a global audience?
It's a really interesting thing. And I think when we first started working with television, I think that as people from Southern African continent, we have a bit of an inferiority complex to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And we also feel like we have to explain our country if we want people from outside to understand. So sometimes we think, we've got to explain our culture and we have to explain our country. And that's not storytelling. Storytelling is just showing. You sitting there in the studio, that's who you are. I don't have to explain to the audience coming in if I was putting a camera on you and saying, this is Kat, she's sitting behind a microphone. No, I just come in on Julie and Kat having a conversation. And so we used to explain. So I think there's a lot of things we're learning about authentic storytelling, because actually trying to explain who we are or trying to put messages, a lot of writers come in and they feel strongly about things, so they want to put messages in their writing. Mm-hmm. That's not storytelling either. That's messaging. So you can carry a strong story. The best stories have got a really powerful message in their heart, but they've got to be subliminal. They can't be on the surface. And it's quite a subtle thing, but it's something that we've been learning. And what we've discovered with international people coming in is that the more specific and authentic a story is, the more it can be international. So when it's quite shallow and when it's quite broad, but it's set in a Botswana or a South Africa, it tends to then appeal more just to the people who know. But when you get really specific and authentic, it's a strange thing, but that tends to have more global appeal. And then I think also tapping into things that everybody can universally relate to, such as a family or a mother's dilemma, or, if it's a crime story, then it's a detective solving a murder. That's something that transcends, doesn't matter which country you're in.
We can all relate to it.
We all understand that a detective is going to do a certain kind of job, and there's a crime and there's a mystery, and how are we going to solve it? So genre is one way of transcending borders. But sometimes if we want to tell truly authentic stories about our culture or from our culture, we've got to get very specific and very real and not try to explain too much.
If you just tuned in, we're with Julie Hall in studio, +26739111066. If you have any questions for her, she's a script mentor, she is a screenwriter, and she also writes fiction, right? Did I say it right? Fiction screenwriter. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the way we tend to differentiate between documentaries, which are obviously based on fact, and fiction. But the funny thing about it is, one of my favorite sayings is, fiction is the lie we use to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you're covering really controversial issues or even political things, there are things you can't say. Even in a documentary, you can't necessarily always go there, or otherwise people don't always necessarily want to know them. But in fiction, you can actually take liberties and tell the truth in a different kind of way. So we construct a story that's engaging and entertaining and people want to watch it, but at the heart, at the very depth of it, there's a deep truth. And that's where stories have the most resonance and where they really touch people.
Oh, I love that. You're currently in Botswana right now because you are leading the Botswana Ignite Story Lab mentorship program. What excites you the most about the future of storytelling in Botswana? And what do you think is missing right now in terms of our filmmaking industry? What's holding us back from being export ready?
So there's a couple of things. The first is the Botswana Ignite Story Lab is a really exciting program. And that's where with the Botswana government and partners are really trying to invest in the industry here and to grow the industry. So, you know, we all love watching movies and hearing music and that kind of thing. And entertainment can actually be really big business. Often it's not recognized as such. So I think the purpose of the lab is to help upskill the industry and try and, you know, help people to make that leap from telling great local stories to telling great international stories. And it's a hard thing to quantify what makes something local and what makes it international. And those are some of the things we're exploring in the Story Lab. So I think, obviously for Botswana, it's a big country with a small population. That means quite a small market. And obviously, we say show business. One of the operative words is business. So in order to make high quality productions with the kind of money, not quite Hollywood money, but almost Hollywood money is what we're looking for, you then have to be able to sell to a wide audience. So I think that Botswana's got all the potential, all the talent. I've been very impressed by the talent and the potential I've encountered here so far. So I'm very excited. You can tell
I'm a top student. It's fine. Don't be shy.
Kat. Yeah, Kat is one of our students. We are very excited at the depth of talent. And I think so it's really about being able to look broader and be realistic about where you can sell. So I think it's one of the things we've talked about in the lab where, you know, there are people who want to go straight out and make their most personal film or their most artistic film or, you know, something quite difficult. And when you look at the top filmmakers in the world, one of the guys we've been talking about is Ryan Coogler, because he's just done Sinners, and everyone in the lab is just in love with Sinners because it's just such an incredible film. But it's not his first film. He didn't come out of film school or, you know, go into Hollywood and say, let me make this big budget film. That's so brave and also very innovative. And I think what's exciting about what he's done is that we keep seeing rehashes of the same old stuff to a certain degree. Like it's done with flash and spectacle, but a lot of stuff is being rehashed. And he's done something really original. But he had to start with short films.
Oh, really?
And then he made a smaller film called Fruitvale Station, I think it was. You know, and then. So he built his way up. And in a similar way, Botswana as a country and as an industry is going to have to do the same thing. So I guess one has to start smaller, but also think commercial, and then build up. So as storytellers, we always have to be flexible and always bear in mind the audience. You know, we're not writing for ourselves. We're always writing for the audience. So we always have to think about that. We've got to be aware of it, but at the same time, we also have to be true to ourselves. Again, it's one of those anomalies about writing where we want to give the audience what they want. We have to give it to them in a way that they don't expect. And somewhere along the way, we've got to be innovative, but not so innovative that nobody knows what you're doing.
All right.
So it's, yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, Julie. To every single creative out there, your voice matters, your story matters, and the world is waiting to hear it. Just be true to yourself, and most importantly, represent Botswana for the diamond that it is.